Welcome to Believing the Word with author and pastor Dan Shunk. This program is a ministry of Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Here's what's coming up in today's message.
There was several times where David, when he was here and ruling Israel, performed small functions of the priest, and the Lord never chastised him for it. And it's very interesting that here we see this prince. In any case, almost everybody you read, not knowing who this prince is, would think that this is somebody from the tribe of Judah, whether it's David or Jesus Christ, or if it is the earthly leader at the time. That seems to indicate that this leader will be from the tribe of Judah, not a priest, and yet we see him doing these religious works in the temple.
Why will there be sacrifices in the millennial kingdom if Christ's sacrifice is complete? Ezekiel 44 through 46 answers this common question. These offerings won't provide salvation. They'll serve to commemorate, pointing people back to Jesus' once-for-all sacrifice on the cross. Like the Lord's Supper today, they will remind the world of God's amazing grace while asserting His holiness. And we won't just learn why, but also how we will worship under Christ's righteous millennial reign, showing that in His kingdom, everything centers on honoring the King, the Savior, and remembering the price of our redemption. Now here's Pastor Dan in the book of Ezekiel as he continues his message, Why Sacrifice in the Millennium?
In verse 13, they shall not approach to me to minister as a priest to me, nor approach any of my holy things, to the things that are most holy, but they will bear their dishonor and their abominations which they have done. Yet, in verse 14, yet I will appoint them as keepers of the responsibility for the house, of all its service, and of all that shall be done in it. Now, it's specifically talking about a group of Levitical Levites, that we don't even know if they're Levitical priests, but Levites that are not going to have the privilege of being able to specifically be priests and offer the sacrifices. Now, which group of idolatrous priests? It's unclear which group it's referring to, but it does seem to be the priests in Ithamar's line. You might remember the last time we were together, we took a lot of time to go through the difference between Aaron's son Ithamar and Aaron's son Eleazar, and the priestly lineage that came out of them, and the way the priestly lineage through Ithamar was cursed in the days of Eli. And then it was prophesied, and then it happened in the days of Solomon that the priestly lineage switched over from Aaron's son Ithamar over to Aaron's son Eleazar. And it seems to be that is, again, what it's talking about here, just in context with the last couple of chapters that we've already read. And so these Levites will not be utilized as priests, but they will be utilized, it says, as gatekeepers and as servants and as helpers still. If you read through verse 10 through 13, with all that they did to stumble and to hinder Israel, you should not get to the end where it says, you don't get to be priests. You shouldn't get to the end and say, oh, God is so mean. You should get to the end of 10 through 13 and you should say, what mercy by God that He would even still use them. They still get to serve and minister to God. They still get to use their gifts. Praise God for His mercy and grace. And that is the same for us. Oh, even in this life, you may have consequences from past sins. You may have, your life may be different because of some major sins that you've self-inflicted. But praise God, He can still use you. He can still use all of us, and we can move forward and do good things for the Lord. What mercy. I love to see that here. But what's interesting, though, is not only do they get used in the millennial kingdom, but they can't bashfully hide in anonymity. They're going to be out there. They're going to be serving. They're not going to be the priests, but they're going to be serving. And so it'll sort of be a way, I believe it's a way of presenting strong justice, that they will be seen as servants and not priests, but yet at the same time, it's God's grace that they are used as servants at all. They were quite an example of evil. And now I think they're going to be used as an example of God's perfect goodness, to allow them back and to be utilized. They will end up being there will end up being rewards and consequences in life. And I think this is a good example of that with these Levites and the way they're going to be utilized. But let's continue here. Let's start looking at some of their responsibilities. We're going to read one more little section here in verse 15 through 19, and then you'll sort of see the progress and why we're going to sort of skip through some more of the verses about these offerings. So we pick up in verse 15. The Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok, who keep the responsibility of my sanctuary when the sons of Israel went astray from me, shall come near to me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to bring near to me the fat and the blood, declares Lord Yahweh. Let me just close the loop on what we were just talking about a second ago. The sons of Zadok, remember, these are of Aaron's son Eleazar. Again, this goes back to what we were saying, that these other priests, the sons of Ithamar, are not utilized as priests, but these sons of Eleazar, sons of Zadok, they will be utilized as priests. We talked heavily about this last time, and this is why we're just going to keep going. So verse 16, they shall enter my sanctuary, they shall come near to my table, these are the priests, the son of Zadok, to minister to me and keep the responsibility given to me. In verse 17, and it will be that when they enter into the gates of the inner court, they shall be clothed with linen garments, and wool shall not be on them while they are ministering in the gates of the inner court and in the house. Linen headdresses, in verse 18, shall be on their heads, and linen undergarments shall be on their loins. They shall not gird themselves with anything which makes them sweat. And when they go out into the outer court to the people, they shall put off their garments in which they have been ministering, and lay them in the holy chambers. Then they shall put on other garments, so that they will not transmit holiness. Wow, that's amazing. So that they will not transmit holiness to the people with their garments. So linen garments are only mentioned here. There's no ornamentation, again, even in the Levitical clothing. There's nothing ornate listed in this whole temple or even in the priest's outfits. So it's just linen garments. And what an amazing, simplistic way to represent the reality that should be the same for all of us even today, that service to the Lord should be no sweat. It should be no sweat. It should be a joy. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. It's not through great effort and striving and toil that we attain heaven, or it's not through great effort, striving, or toil that we attain pleasing God. It's no sweat to please God, because he's pleased when we accept Christ, and that's the way he's pleased. So it should be no sweat. That's an easy way to think about it. Oh, praise God. But notice here at the end of this section describing the priests, their outfits, it says in verse 19 that when they go out from performing their work, they need to go out and change their clothes before they go back out to the people. And it even tells us why there in verse 19, so that they don't transmit holiness to the people with their garments. I think it's Habakkuk chapter 2 that he actually makes the point. Habakkuk is talking to Israel about their sins, and he says, listen, if you have a dirty cloth and a clean cloth, you put them together, what's going to happen? You're right. You're transmitting dirtiness, right? We see that all the time, right? You don't have somebody that's like in perfect health walk in the room, like one of our bodybuilder, people walk in the room and you're like, oh, come sit next to me. I want to pick up. I want you to osmosisly give that to me. It doesn't work that way. But the first time somebody comes in the room and they're like, sniffling all up in that, you're like, go sit over there, because you can pick that up. There's certain things you can pick up, but you can't pick up holiness. You can only pick up the junk. And what an awesome thing here in the temple, the ceremony, the work that's done here. It's so righteous that you could actually transmit that out. And the Lord's like, no, that's for in here. That's for in the temple. We're doing that in here. And before you go out, take off your holy clothes. That's for in here. This is for this place of perfect worship. What an awesome thing. In this fallen world, all we could pass on is contamination, but in the kingdom, you could pass on holiness. That's amazing. Oh, what a neat remark. Now, we're going to skip through a couple of these sections here, but in verse 20 through 24, this now lists out the qualifications for these priests, these sons of Eleazar, these sons of Zadok that will be priests. These qualifications in verse 20 through 24, they are the same as listed in the Torah, in the books of Moses. Things like men must cut their hair, but not shave it, in verse 20. They cannot drink wine, verse 22. Verse 20, that's verse 21. Verse 22 is that their standards for choosing a wife. Tell that to your Catholic friend. They get to choose a wife. Okay, and then we continue into verse 23 and 24, and it lists the priest's duties. They lead the people in all religious matters. And they're there to show the people what is holy and what is not holy, the difference between those. And indeed also in verse 24, they're there to judge the people in civil matters. Wouldn't it be nice to finally go to court and have perfect justice given? That'll happen in this day, and it will be the priests that are there to do that. Now we go into this next section, verse 25 through 31, and this now speaks of the priest's lifestyle choices. So if we've already seen their qualifications, now in these verses we see their lifestyle choices. Things like they cannot go near dead bodies. There are a few exceptions given for close family and things like that, because again, it's all about showing a difference between what is holy and good and what is not. It then goes in verse 28 through 31, and it talks about how they do not inherit land, but God sustains them. They live by God's provision through all of their food and their housing and all of that. And so this chapter 44 finishes with all of the priestly choosing and their responsibilities and their duties. And now we go immediately over to chapter 45, and this now heavily goes into the prince that we've been talking about. It's going to talk not only about the prince, it'll talk about his land and all of his responsibilities, both his civil and religious duties that he's going to perform. And that is this chapter 45. And we begin in verses 1 through 6 as this chapter opens up, and it begins. We won't read through this section, but it begins to describe his land. And this is an 8-mile by 8-mile space for the temple complex that's listed here. So again, the temple itself is much smaller than 8 miles by 8 miles, but the whole complex around the temple is roughly 8 miles by 8 miles. And it lists out residences for where the Levites and the priests will live, as well as where the city itself will be, and then even the gardens around it. And if you're a foolish man like me, you're like, oh, gardens, what do they need flowers for? No, it's the food, okay? It's the food, silly. So I'm saying that to me, by the way. So that is what the gardens are all about. I mean, maybe they'll have some flowers too. Sorry. Maybe they will. But that's for the food, for the priests. We already looked, if you remember the last time, at the temple itself, and it showed the kitchens for the priests, and it showed their chambers and other places like that. So it's all very much, economical. It all makes sense the way this is laid out. And so this whole 8 by 8 area around the temple is listed here in these first several verses. But I do want to read in verse 7 and 8, if we could. Let's look at verse 7 of chapter 45. Now the prince shall have land on either side of the holy contribution and the city's possession of land, adjacent to the holy contribution and the city's possession of land on the west side towards the west and onward, and the east side towards the east, and in length it'll be comparable to one of its portions from the west side to the east side. In verse 8, this shall be his land for a possession in Israel. So my princes shall no longer mistreat my people, but they shall give the rest of the land to the house of Israel according to their tribes. I find this interesting that it denotes here why the Lord is apportioning this out this way. And it specifically says, so that they don't mistreat my people. If you remember the way it was designed throughout the whole Old Testament period of Israel, is that the priests had Levitical cities throughout the land. in all of the different tribes. And then there was priests that just lived all over, and they relied on the Lord for their provision. And it would have been easy for some of these priests to go to the people that they were living around and just sort of do the whole victim, trip. Woe is me, I don't have anything like you do. and just constantly try to get from the people. And I imagine that's part of what the Lord's talking about here, where he says, look, this is my provision for them, and they will no longer mistreat the people. They won't be tempted to pull from the other people. The prince, though, it notes here in these verses, the prince in these days, he's going to get land on the east and to the west side of this holy portion. And of course, we're talking about this 8 mile by 8 mile section as the holy portion of land. And the prince is going to get all that land to the east of it and to the west of it as you go out towards the Mediterranean and over towards the Dead Sea. And it's set up that way so that this prince cannot consider the rest of the land his. That is his portion, and that is what he gets. We continue to verse 9 through 12. I'm not going to read some of these sections here, but in verse 9 through 12, although I don't want to read it, I want to tell you that verse 9 through 12, these are the commandments for the princes to judge the people with justice. So this prince is given specific information for how to rightly rule over the people. And then you get down to verse 13 through 17, for those of you that like to outline these things. And now these are the commandments for the prince's offerings for the people from his own supply, from what he has been given. So you might say verse 9 through 12 is his civil responsibilities, and then verse 13 through 17 are his religious responsibilities. It was actually, I was talking to Pastor Randy Mosier in Hagerstown about this section recently, and it was interesting. He noted that there was several times where David, when he was here and ruling Israel, performed small functions of the priest, and the Lord never chastised him for it. And it's very interesting that here we see this prince. In any case, almost everybody you read, not knowing who this prince is, would think that this is somebody from the tribe of Judah, whether it's David or Jesus Christ, or if it is the earthly leader at the time. That seems to indicate that this leader will be from the tribe of Judah, not a priest, and yet we see him doing these religious works in the temple. So just very fascinating. Of course, Christ himself, we know, was not only a civil ruler, but he was also a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So just more intrigue to exactly the identity of this priest. And so that's why you'd see many people would lean towards saying that this is Jesus Christ himself that will be this prince. Now, I do want to pick up and read a little bit in verse 18. After seeing the civil and religious responsibilities of the priest, we get to verse 18, and it says, "Thus saith Lord Yahweh, in the first month, on the first of the month, you shall take a bull from the herd without blemish and purify the sanctuary. The priest shall take some of the blood from the sin offering and put it on the doorposts of the house, on the four corners of the ledge of the altar, and on the posts of the gates of the inner court. And thus you shall do on the 7th day of the month for everyone who errs or is simple-minded," you'd say the mentally infirm, "so you shall make atonement for your house." So there is an annual sin offering listed here that is for purifying the temple itself. But it's not just for that, but it's also to cover the mentally infirm that would be there at the temple, or that would be showing up at the temple. So this is one of the first real offerings listed here, is this offering to purify the temple itself. And I want to read some more in verse 21. It says, "In the first month, on the 14th day of the month," does anybody recognize that date? First month, 14th day of the month. That is the Passover. Okay, that is the day of the Passover, and that's what we're about to look at here. Let's look at this. So in the first month, 14th day of the month, you shall have the Passover, a feast for 7 days. Unleavened bread shall be eaten, and on that day the prince shall provide for himself and all the people of the land a bull for a sin offering. Verse 23, "During the 7 days of the feast, he shall provide as a burnt offering to Yahweh 7 bulls and 7 rams without blemish on every day of the 7 days, and also a male goat daily for a sin offering. In verse 24, he shall provide a grain offering. You might know that as a meal offering. Same thing. And that will be, it tells you how big it is here. It's an ephod with a bull and an ephod with a ram and a hin of oil with an ephod. Verse 25, in the 7th month, on the 15th day of the month, does anybody recognize that date? 7th month, 15th day. That is the festival of tabernacles. It says here that at that feast, he shall provide like this. In other words, the same way as the Passover. 7 days for a sin offering, the burnt offering, the grain offering, and the oil. So all of this put together here, verse 21 through 25, it's now going in to saying that we will be celebrating and recognizing these annual feasts, specifically the annual Passover feast. The prince is offering here many types of sin offerings for himself and for the people. And then it goes finally there to mention how the priest will be offering burnt offerings and meal offerings during the Feast of Tabernacles. The prince does all of these things. So we will be recognizing these holidays continually, and the prince is heavily involved with these things. You know, we're just coming out of a minute where we went to the East Coast Pastors Conference down in Philadelphia, surrounded by 2,000 guys, pastors and more, and it's something that I've come to love, to look forward to as an annual event. And I hope you all have things like that in your life, things that you can look forward to as maybe an annual event, maybe a semi-annual event or otherwise. And just to know that these types of things will continue, that we'll have these kind of annual reminders. It's such a joyful thing to have things to look forward to, isn't it? And we're going to continue to have that here in the millennial period. I don't think even when we get to the everlasting state, I don't think you're ever going to be like, nothing special is coming up. I think there's still going to be the reality of time. There's still going to be the ability to anticipate, hey, something's coming up soon or whatever. I think there's still going to be that kind of thrill of knowing that there's the sort of the passing of time and things special that are coming up. And certainly we'll have that here during the millennial kingdom. So chapter 45, this prince is heavily involved in civil and religious responsibilities. And now we go into chapter 46. That's our final chapter for today. And this chapter goes into much, much more of the calendar, the planning of all of these things, different temple rituals around the calendar, not just these 2 annual events that we just mentioned, but many more in chapter 46. And so it begins in verse 1 through 8, with a look at the Sabbath day and the new moon celebrations. And so let's take a look at reading a little bit of this. In fact, we will read much of chapter 46. So let's pick up in chapter 46, verse 1. Thus saith Lord Yahweh, the gate of the inner court facing east shall be shut the 6 working days, but it shall be opened on the Sabbath day and opened on the day of the new moon. In verse 2, then the priest shall enter by way of the porch of the gate from outside and stand by the post of the gate. Then the priest shall provide his burnt offerings and his peace offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate and then go out, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening. In verse 3, the people of the land shall also worship at the entrance of that gate before Yahweh on the Sabbath days and on the new moons. Of course, your Sabbath days are weekly, and your new moons, of course, are once a month. Verse 4, now the burnt offerings, which the prince shall bring near to Yahweh on the Sabbath day, shall be, and here specifically is this burnt offering, it's going to be 6 lambs without blemish, and also a ram without blemish. In verse 5, the meal offering, or the grain offering, that is, shall be an ephod with a ram, and the grain or meal offering with the lambs shall be a gift from his hand, as well as a hin of oil, that's a unit of measurement, right, with an ephod. In verse 6, and on the day of the new moon, he shall offer a bull from the herd without blemish, also 6 lambs and a ram, which shall be without blemish. In verse 7, he shall provide a meal offering, an ephod with a bull and an ephod with a ram, and with the lambs as much as he's able, and a hin of oil with an ephod. Verse 8, and when the prince enters, he shall go in by way of the porch of the gate, and he shall go out the same way. And so these verses describe, first of all, the inner gate. Of course, we have the arrow on the map there showing that inner gate. The inner eastern gate, it only opens on the Sabbath days and on new moons. Not the full moon, but the new moons. That's the top of the month is the new moon.
You've been listening to Believing the Word, a ministry of author and pastor Dan Shunk at Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Pastor Dan has been teaching through a series in the book of Ezekiel. We'd love to get connected with you and hear about how God is working in your life through this teaching program. You can reach us by phone at 717-500-1102. Again, that number is 717-500-1102. You can also check us out at our website at ccchambersburg.org, where you can learn more about the ministry of Calvary Chapel Chambersburg and find our chapter-by-chapter messages. If you're in the Chambersburg area, we'd love to have you join us Sunday mornings and Thursday evenings on 5121 Coffee Avenue. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back with more from the book of Ezekiel. But until then, this has been Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.